When John Carpenter's The Thing released in 1982, it had to compete against another alien juggernaut called E.T., the one directed by Mr. Spielberg. That one featured this warm, fuzzy alien in a tale of love, friendship, and the ingredients that the professor would use to make the Powerpuff Girls: sugar, spice, and everything nice. Naturally, people loved that movie, and The Thing suffered because it was a grimdark story about paranoia, claustrophobia, and all the things that weren't very nice. The movie tanked upon its release, the critics hated it, but more than 4 decades later, the questions that The Thing left behind are what's talked about, and not E.T. I don't think we need to spell out what we're trying to say here, but anyways, in this video, we're going to explore the 10 biggest and most mind-bending burning questions about the Thing universe. But before we begin, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvelous videos in the future, so let's cut to the chase. Who were the pilots of the Thing's spaceship? So let's talk about the crew that had the misfortune of giving the Thing a ride to Earth. It's been made pretty clear in the 2 The Thing movies that the UFO the Thing arrived in wasn't its own, and that the creature was simply a passenger, either willing or unwilling. The Thing got on board someone else's ship, most likely by tricking its way in, and everything that happened after that was a slow-motion disaster. The 2011 Thing prequel almost gave us a clear look at the alien pilots who originally ran that ship, but they got axed from the final cut thanks to budget problems. But more importantly, the test audiences were not very enthusiastic about the creature. In early production, Amalgamated Dynamics did build this fully functional animatronic puppet for the pilot creature. It's out there on the internet if you want to see what might have been. Now, these pilot aliens weren't like the pilots or engineers from the Alien franchise. Instead, these guys were mostly the interstellar version of biologists. However, there are certain similarities between the 2, which we'll speak about in a bit. Coming back to the Thing's pilots, though, they traveled from planet to planet, scooping up life forms and storing them in containment pods for study, or maybe for preservation, or maybe even for creation purposes. If that sounds like a weird cosmic zoo to you, then you're not alone. We're right there with you, but unfortunately, they picked up the wrong specimen at some point. The Thing probably got captured while disguised as some other harmless organism, and once on board, it did what it does best. It broke free, took over, and wrecked everything. Judging by the state of the ship buried in the Antarctic ice, the Thing either started a war inside the vessel or sabotaged the controls once it had enough biomass to make the move. Design-wise, the pilot aliens were giants that measured roughly 12 to 16 feet in height and had a biomechanical look. Their heads had 3 vertical eyes, and they used a breathing device that stretched from their backs to their chests. Now, the one thing that makes them truly unique is how they interfaced with the ship. Instead of regular consoles and buttons and joysticks, these pilots pretty much connected themselves directly into the ship via tubes that plugged into bioports in their backs. Their nervous system basically talked to the ship's systems. The entire setup and existence leaned towards the biomechanical, kind of like the engineers from Prometheus. In fact, comparisons between the 2 are tough to ignore. The engineers built life through black goo. These guys collected it, and the only purpose we can see behind this genetic splicing is to create more life forms, much like the engineers did. The 2011 film originally planned to explore these aliens in depth. There were supposed to be 3 types of pilot appearances, namely a mummified corpse, a living pilot, and one that had been imitated by the Thing. It would have painted a much fuller picture of what really went wrong in that spaceship. The original script had Kate, the lead, entering the ship and finding the mummified pilot, but before she could make sense of it, a living pilot hybrid, fully assimilated by the Thing, would attack her. Now, the ship couldn't function without a biologically connected pilot, which means the Thing had to take on that specific form to fly out of there. In this version, the Thing pilot detaches its control tubes when it lunges at Kate, but she has a grenade and threatens to blow the whole thing sky high. Right then, Carter, who's been assimilated by the Thing already, walks in and sees the problem. If Kate drops the grenade, everyone dies. So he torches the Thing pilot with a flamethrower, pretending to be on Kate's side. Of course, this is a trick to win her trust, and if this scene had stayed in the final cut, it would have shown us the lengths to which the Thing will go to save itself. In hindsight, the pilots should have been kept in the film because they deepened and strengthened the lore without compromising anything that had already been established. Nevertheless, let's move on to our next question. Whose mysterious shadow is it? Who does the dog infect? If there's one thing about John Carpenter's The Thing that's always intrigued us, It's that it has so many things left for the audience to deduce and figure out even after the credits have started to roll. One such mysterious moment is early in the film when we see that infected dog finding a man alone in his room, and the next thing we know, that dog was heading inside the room to infect that individual. You don't see the person's face, you just get this ambiguous shadow on the wall, and from that point on, the infection spreads, which means this guy was also the first human to get infected. So the obvious question you have to ask is, whose shadow was it? In order to get the answer to that question, we can try elimination. Firstly, there are only a couple of people in the movie who turn into thing creatures without us seeing when it happens. That leaves Norris and Palmer. Blair can be eliminated at the beginning itself because his behavior stays mostly human for a while, even after the dog scene. Plus, if he were infected that early, a lot of what he does, like smashing the radio and isolating himself, wouldn't make much sense unless he was still thinking like a person. And Childs' blood test later on comes back clean, so unless you're going full conspiracy mode, he's not your guy either. Furthermore, Childs was bald, and the man in the shadow clearly had hair, so we can very well eliminate Childs on that as well. Now, here's a detail that actually makes things more confusing and mysterious than they already are. The shadow we see in that shot isn't actually from any of the actors. John Carpenter actually used a crew member to cast the shadow so that things would be kept vague. Palmer was originally meant to be the guy, but his silhouette was too easy to recognize, the director didn't go with him. Still, if we're using the process of elimination and looking at the way scenes unfold afterward, Norris makes the most sense. Palmer and Childs are later seen chilling together and alone, and it's here that Palmer lights up a joint. If Palmer was already the thing at that point, there's no reason he wouldn't have assimilated Childs right then. So if someone got taken during that dog encounter, odds are it's Norris. What happened to Fuches in John Carpenter's The Thing? Fuches' death is probably the most puzzling and baffling one in The Thing, mostly because the movie doesn't give us much to work with. All we get is a charred body outside the base and a few throwaway lines that suggest he might have torched himself, but when you really dig into it, the suicide theory doesn't quite hold up. Fuches didn't seem to be going crazy, and he didn't have anything that would push him to take his own life, especially for what seems like no good reason. I mean, the man had his doubts, there's no denying that, but he stayed focused on finding a way to help the team. He'd even started working on a test to detect infection. A guy who's determined doesn't randomly decide to go out and set himself on fire with a flare, so what really was the reason behind his death? One theory that holds more weight is that the Blair thing killed him. Blair had already been locked up for losing it earlier, but that didn't stop him from building a whole-ass spacecraft underneath the shed. He needed parts, and a blackout gave him the perfect excuse to move around undetected. Fuches may have seen a figure during the outage and followed it outside, thinking it was Blair, who, by the way, was someone he trusted. But that trust might have gotten him killed. Blair thing might have seen him as a threat, especially with Fuches getting close to cracking a detection method, so rather than risking assimilation, which as you may very well know, takes time and draws a hell of a lot of attention, the Blair thing simply killed him, burned the body, and walked away. Then there's the other theory. It's very likely that Fuches actually lit himself up after a close call with the thing. Maybe he ran outside, thought he was infected or about to be, and decided to stop it before it took over completely. It would explain the flare and the body. It fits the idea that someone smart like Fuches might try to end it before becoming a danger to the rest. Either way, suicide or not, his death felt rushed. The movie didn't want us to look too closely, but that's probably why fans still talk about it decades later.
Somebody got to the blood! What?
Who sabotaged the blood supply? In The Thing, everyone's pointing fingers, sweating bullets, and trying not to get turned into alien soup. But someone wrecks the blood storage, and that pretty much becomes a major reason why many people lose their lives in the movie later on. The scene takes place at a time we like to call midway through the madness. Copper suggests that they run blood tests to catch the imposter, only to find the bloodstock torn open and dripping. The platelets had not yet done their job, and the blood was still very fresh, which meant that someone had sabotaged the blood storage mere minutes ago. And this was also the exact moment when paranoia really kicked in, while the mutual trust went out the window. Now in theory, only Gary and Copper had access to the blood. Gary had the keys, and Copper, on the other hand, had regular access. When the team finds the ruined supplies, nobody can explain how it happened, and both men suddenly look sketchy. Blair was already locked up for losing it, and Clark was with the dead dogs, while Knowles was off somewhere else, and finally, Windows was still nursing his wounds. So, the only guys in the room when Copper pitched the test, Creedy, Childs, Fuches, Gary, and Copper, none of whom were infected at the time, or at least that's what we can deduce based on later events and blood tests. So the question we must really ask is, where were Palmer and Norris when the blood storage was wrecked? You see, these two are the two confirmed infected who weren't present when the blood test idea was given to everyone, and that matters. The sabotage looked recent. It happened after the test suggestion, not before. That points to someone hearing the plan, panicking, and deciding to mess it up fast. Palmer seems like the most likely candidate. He has zero reaction when the group finds the blood destroyed. It was as if he already knew about the whole thing and didn't know how to react. Furthermore, his silence feels off, especially when everyone else is melting down and losing their shit. There's also the matter of the keys. Windows dropped them after the suggestion, and Palmer could have picked them up. Norris might have helped too. So if you think about it, keys go missing, the blood gets wrecked, and no one sees a thing. Pretty convenient for the alien life form trying to stay hidden. And then we can also consider how the scene was framed. When Gary gives up command, Palmer can be seen sitting in the background, out of focus, like he's quietly pleased with whatever was happening. At the end of the day, Carpenter never gave us a straight answer. That's why the film still charms us to this day, as we mentioned earlier. We just gots to know, and the film makes us deduce this stuff on our own. Where did Knowles disappear to in the movie? Knowles has one of the most frustratingly open-ended fates in The Thing. Unlike most others who meet their maker in a dramatic blaze or through exploding into some monster hybrid, Knowles simply disappears. After Fuches vanishes during a power outage, MacReady takes Knowles and Windows out to investigate. They find a burnt body in the snow, but the only clue is a pair of glasses. MacReady and Knowles then head to the pilot's shack. At some point, Knowles cuts MacReady loose after spotting a torn name-tag shirt and assumes the worst. He returns to the base, and the tension inside the camp hits boiling point. MacReady breaks in with dynamite, and during the standoff, Norris collapses from a heart attack. Copper tries to save him, but his chest opens up and bites his arms off. Turns out, Norris was a thing. That gets him torched. This is when MacReady figures out the wire blood test. Knowles survives all that and sticks around to help finish the testing. They all head out to check on Blair, who had been locked in a shed, but Blair's gone, and he's been busy tunneling under the floor and building a mini alien escape pod. It's pretty clear he's no longer human. The crew knows they're not making it out alive, so the goal shifts to torching the entire outpost. Gary gets grabbed and assimilated underground, which is when Knowles hears something, leaves his post, and vanishes. That's it. He's just gone, and we never see him later, as if Mr. Carpenter forgot about the character itself. The obvious theory is that Blair Thing took him out and dumped him like Gary, but without a body or any final scene, it's all guesswork. There were plans to show Knowles being killed under the floorboards during Blair Thing's final attack. He was supposed to scream for help before being torn apart. Due to time and budget cuts, the scene got scrapped. The film left his fate hanging. Neither MacReady nor Childs mention him again. Odds are they assumed he didn't make it out of the explosion that leveled the place. In the comic, The Thing from Another World, MacReady finds Knowles' charred body at the wrecked outpost with no sign of assimilation. It gets burned anyways, just to be sure. The novelization goes a different way. Knowles gets cornered in a bathroom by Blair Thing, breaks his leg, and chooses to stab himself in the throat rather than get taken. Then there's the 2024 remaster of the 2002 video game, where Knowles' corpse turns up with a huge chest wound and a sharp object in hand. Whether it was suicide or an attack, he's definitely dead. So, while the film doesn't hand us answers, every version outside it agrees that Knowles definitely didn't walk away. Could we ever truly contain the Thing? If we're being honest with ourselves, there's no way humanity could contain the Thing. Not now, not in 1982, not ever. The moment that alien hitched a ride to Earth, our fates were sealed. Sure, the crew at Outpost 31 did their best to slow things down, but that wasn't a victory. It was damage control at best. A knee-jerk reaction to a situation quickly spiraling out of control. And honestly, even that's being generous. Let's start with Blair and his computer. Nearly halfway into the movie, he runs a simulation and discovers that if the Thing ever made it to a populated area, the entire world would be assimilated in 27,000 hours, roughly just 3 years. That's assuming a steady spread and a few missed infections and maybe some lucky containment attempts, but Blair's math was actually too optimistic. His model didn't factor in air travel, globalization, or the fact that the Thing doesn't follow rules. It's not a virus or a bacteria. It doesn't need a host to die to move on. It eats you alive from the inside, takes over your cells and turns your body into a puppet. Now keep in mind that the dog that the Norwegians chased into the American camp was already infected. It wandered around freely before anyone even blinked. Bennings and Clark both made contact with it. That was enough. Later in the film, Fuches explains that even a microscopic bit of the thing is enough to assimilate an entire organism. So when the infected dog scratched the floor, shook out its fur, and shed a few skin cells, contaminated the outpost. And if that wasn't enough, once human assimilation started, the level of biological fallout went through the roof. Every infected person sheds millions of cells every day. Every breath, every touch, every trace of spit or sweat is potentially infectious. And that's just inside the building. Step outside and things get worse. People love to act like Antarctica is empty, like it's a frozen wasteland with no life at all, but that's not true. There are microorganisms, fungi, bacteria, lichen, bugs. There are birds, seals, fish, and phytoplankton teeming in the surrounding waters. Even if the thing never made it to a city, it could still find a way into one of these ecosystems. Blair said it himself. All it had to do was get into the water. From there, it could become a seal or a killer whale and swim away, or it could catch a bird and fly to South America. And if something attacked it, no problem. It would just become whatever attacked it, maybe even lay some eggs while it was at it. The thing didn't need to become human. That was optional. All it really needed was time. Time is exactly what we gave it. Even if we pretend MacReady and Childs were both clean at the end of the film, the damage was done. The outpost had thing blood all over it. Dead infected bodies sat there waiting to thaw. Cells soaked into the ground. Cleanup crew arrived, that would be game over. And if no one came, there's still no guarantee the thing would stay frozen. The planet's getting warmer. Climate change, tectonic shifts, even a seasonal thaw could let the thing loose once again. All it needs is a bird, a fish, or even a gust of wind to carry a bit of its cells out into the world. And the moment it finds a new host, we're back at square one. The truth is, the thing was never about the monster. It was about what happens when something smarter, sneakier, and way more adaptable than us decides to walk among us. The entire film thrives on paranoia because that's the only realistic reaction to something like this. You can't shoot it, you can't cure it, you probably won't even see it coming. And if it gets to civilization, there's no putting that toothpaste back in the tube. Even if you try to contain it, you're only delaying the inevitable. Burn one infected body and a dozen shed cells might have already floated off into the snow. Test everyone and maybe you miss the guy who's halfway through assimilation. Quarantine a building and maybe the thing is already in the plumbing or the vents. We're wired to think in terms of visible threats, but the thing doesn't care about that at all. It doesn't scream until it's already won. Blair wanted to destroy the radio, kill the dogs, and isolate everyone. People thought he'd lost it. In hindsight, he was probably the only one thinking straight because he understood that once the thing got loose, there was no walking it back. I mean, you can't build a cure for it, and good luck negotiating with this alien. So yeah, if the thing were real, we wouldn't beat it. We'd be lucky to slow it down, but humanity would eventually go down, and so would all other fauna on the planet. As for its relationship with flora, we'll speak about that in a bit. Who was the thing at the end? We'll be honest, the end of the 1982 Thing movie is one of the biggest cliffhangers ever. MacReady and Childs are the only two survivors after the chaos, death, and paranoia that wiped out the rest of the American team and the Norwegian team before that. The place is a frozen wasteland, and they've both had their share of close calls. MacReady, after blowing up the station and destroying the thing, sits with Childs in the snow, staring at the burning wreckage of their former lives. They're freezing, exhausted, and most likely headed toward death by hypothermia. The two of them sit there with a bottle of scotch, and that's it. The movie ends, leaving a lingering question in our hearts as well as theirs. We're left to wonder if one of them is the thing, or is it possible that both are? This cliffhanger has, of course, given birth to a lot of fan theories. Some wonder if Childs was actually infected, or maybe MacReady was the one who'd been taken over. John Carpenter, the man who made the film, wanted it that way. He wanted audiences to stew in that uncertain, just like the characters in the film. In the 90s, Carpenter and Kurt Russell recorded a director's commentary where they casually admitted they hadn't figured out who was human and who wasn't by the end of the movie. One of the most popular theories that's cropped up to try and clear up the ending is the eye gleam theory. According to cinematographer Dean Cundy, filming the blood test scene, Carpenter had the idea to have a light reflect in the eyes of the humans. People thought this meant we could tell who was human and who wasn't by looking at their eyes in the final scene, but Cundy himself later said that the idea was only used in that one scene. It wasn't meant to be a running theme throughout the movie, so while the eye theory is fun, it doesn't actually clear anything up. In fact, Carpenter himself shot down the eye gleam theory in 2023 saying Cundy has no clue what he's talking. He also mentioned that he knows exactly who the thing is at the end, but he's keeping that secret himself. Intriguingly enough, the mystery was sort of addressed 20 years later in the Thing video game. In this game, you play as Captain Blake, a member of a rescue team sent to find out what happened to the original crew. While exploring, Blake uncovers a recording from MacReady who admits to his fate. He also finds Childs' body, confirming that the man died from hypothermia. The game ends with Blake meeting a pilot who helps him escape the base, and as it turns out, the pilot is MacReady. It's a tragic but definitive answer to the mystery, and since Carpenter considers the game canon, it's as close as we'll get to the truth. Childs, sadly, didn't make it. Both Kurt Russell and Keith David, who played MacReady and Childs, have commented on the movie's ending in interviews. Russell mentioned in a 2023 podcast that he and Carpenter discussed different ways to end the film. They tried several ideas, but in the end, having the two characters just sit there in the cold made the most sense. Russell admitted he sees the ending as a return to square one, a place of no real resolution. Keith David, in a 2023 interview, humorously addressed the mystery, saying, "First, let me clear this up. It wasn't me," while playful adds a bit of clarity in line with the video game's resolution. Carpenter himself hasn't offered much in the way of a direct answer, but it's clear David believes Childs was human at the end. Then we've got the comics, which actually say that it was Childs who was in fact the infected one. So yeah, we simply don't have a definitive answer. The Thing's relationship with plant life. The Thing's interaction with plant life is pretty much a mystery. There's no clear evidence that it can infect or assimilate plant-based organisms. Its only known interaction with plant life came through wood and clothing fibers. However, it couldn't absorb these materials, as MacReady points out. This could hint at the Thing's inability to use plant cells or even dead tissue. What's even more curious is that we've never seen the Thing consume anything other than living animals or humans. Even when it kills, it leaves the bodies untouched, despite there being biomass that could be used. This only means that the Thing doesn't feed on the dead, or perhaps it actively avoids dead tissue. Maybe it's a strategy, like it knows that a host that's been dead too long might raise too many questions and draw attention to its true nature. In a way, it seems like the Thing is playing a long game and chooses to stick to fresh, living tissue for its horrific plans. We also think that it only assimilates with fauna because it's on Earth, where animals are dominant and plants are, well, they're plants. They don't move or pose any major threat apart from a few carnivorous plants, so maybe the Thing found itself on a planet where plants were the dominant species. It could adapt and assimilate with them instead. What are your thoughts? Does the Thing stick with carbon-based life forms? Let us know in the comments down below. The computer simulation's accuracy. Blair's computer simulation in The Thing predicted that once the creature reached civilization, we'd have about 27,000 hours, or roughly 3 years, before humanity was entirely assimilated. But as we mentioned earlier, this was nothing more than a simulation run on a clunky 80s computer by a very paranoid scientist, all of it done in under a day. Predicting something so complex, especially with all the parameters you have to take into consideration, would be extremely difficult, even for the most advanced tech. So, is 3 years a reasonable timeline for the Thing to take over everything? Is it too little or too much? At first, we thought it would be faster. I mean, the Thing is way more deadly than your average zombie apocalypse. It can spread through water supplies, control insects, and even take over entire ecosystems. I mean, imagine a swarm of flying things like insects or birds that could easily overwhelm cities. Its microscopic cells might get into everything. All those tiny, fast-moving creatures might possibly turn the human population into walking hosts. We're talking about a rapid, unstoppable spread. Not to mention, the Thing's intelligence combined with its alien technology could have made it an even bigger threat. Maybe a whole army of things, using futuristic weapons like ray guns and hover tanks, could take over Earth in no time. But then, we thought about it more and realized that if the Thing was that efficient, the first movie would have ended in a few minutes. The dog thing would have just attacked one of the scientists and that's it. Like, that should have been the end of the movie, right? Or maybe after it took out one of the humans from the US outpost. But we must remember that the alien did manage to take over a lot of humans from the Norwegian outpost, and yet it failed to do anything significant with them. So that makes us come to the conclusion that this creature doesn't seem to handle bodies that it takes over all that well. When it's in disguise, it essentially lets the host's brain take over, so much so that the host doesn't even realize something's wrong. That's why the dog can move around like a normal dog. It's just being left to run on autopilot. But when the Thing has to drop its disguise and take full control, it falters, and a lot at that. It can't fire a gun properly or fly a plane without creating more mess than a monkey in a house full of glass cutlery. If it needs to do something more complicated, like hold a conversation or dance, it would fall apart. The thing relies on its hosts to do the work, and when it's not in disguise, it looks like it's flailing around trying to figure out its next move. The thing also doesn't seem to do well under pressure. Instead of quickly attacking or escaping, it'll explode into a mass of tentacles and teeth, which gives humans plenty of time to torch it before it can do any further damage. In fact, in this state, it's usually immobile and extremely vulnerable, and we've seen this behavior throughout the comics as well. When something goes sideways, the thing needs manuals and directions, which it doesn't have because it's not a human, and this behavior applies to almost every task it does. So despite being incredibly powerful, the thing is also largely awkward and ineffective when it needs to perform under pressure. So no, it can't infiltrate a government, assimilate the president, or take control of the world's military. It could technically take over the president's body, but it would struggle to do anything presidential, and making weird alien noises is about all it could manage. Forget about bringing policy changes that help it further its assimilation. I mean, honestly, that might be an improvement over the current administration, but given all of this, maybe 3 years isn't so unreasonable after all. The thing isn't the unstoppable force it might seem at first. It has limitations, and while it's a serious threat, it's not the perfect conquering machine some fans imagine. Sure, it's powerful, but it's clumsy, especially when it comes to controlling bodies for long periods. But hey, that's just my opinion, and we'd love to hear what you guys think about it. Now, lastly, the 10th mystery on our list is about the thing's real form, but you know what? We've done a video on that already, so we're just going to leave a link in the description down below for that one. That brings us to the end of our video. Thanks for sticking with us to the end of this one. We hope you enjoyed watching it as much as we enjoyed making it. If you enjoyed this content, consider liking and subscribing to our channel. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.